All right, let's take a look at the very first North America balance patch. The pre-notice notes are published online. If you haven't seen it, I'll put the link in the description below. Overall, not too surprising. This balance patch is very consistent with what we've seen in the Korean server updates. The Korean server is 2 to 3 months ahead of North America, so I've been staying on top of what's going on in Korea just to get a little bit of insight into what may come for North America. So all of these are consistent with what I've seen in Korea. Obviously, we're missing the balance patch for units that we don't have. And also, we've received updates at launch that Korea still hasn't patched yet. So for example, Sekhmet, I think there was rumors going around that Sekhmet might get nerfed. The version of Sekhmet that we received at release was already the post-nerf version that Korea is about to get in their next balance patch. So Sekhmet is missing from this balance patch because we already have her patched up. So everybody freaking out over the Sekhmet nerf, it's not going to happen. Your Sekhmet will stay as is. I think the other big news with this balance patch is the updates to the summoners. I'll go through each unit and then we'll get into the summoners, and I'll kind of show you what I think about each of the changes here. I wish they would provide a little bit more details. They don't tell us the multipliers, the exact changes in a lot of the units. So I'll give my best interpretation, but I may be wrong depending on what actually gets released. All right, let's get right into it. So starting with global effects. So this means that any unit, any summoner that has this apply to them, they will be affected rather than unit or summoner specific changes. The first one is a big one, and I think a lot of people skip over this. Right now, when you have a attribute advantage, so let's say you're running wind and your opponent is running water. Right now, that wind unit is going to take 10% less damage from the water unit. That is going to increase by 300%, from 10% less damage taken from an inferior attribute to 30%. I think up until now, in both PvE and PvP, the elements and the elemental advantages and disadvantage dynamic hasn't been taken into consideration too seriously because a 10% handicap is not that significant, and the kit of that disadvantaged element may outweigh a 10% reduction in damage, and so people still will bring in fire against a water unit. Now that the damage reduction is 30%, I think we do have to rethink a little bit of the gameplay, especially in PvP, on how we take that into account. So that's a big one that's going to change. I'm excited to see how the meta shifts because of that. The next two are related to the bombing dynamic, which I think is a very much needed buff. In the Korean server, all the Korean streamers say that bombs are not prevalent in the meta in Korea because bombs have a very, number one, they don't crit damage. They don't get any crit damage benefit. So you do the damage of the bomb itself and your crit damage doesn't apply. So that already handicaps the skill of bombing. And secondarily, this buff tells a lot into why they've really haven't used any bombers, which is today, if there is already a bomb on the unit, you can't stack on another bomb. So you can't two stack the bomb like you can in Summoner's War Arena. In the future, if you lay a second bomb down, it's going to explode the bomb that was already on the unit and allow you to stack another bomb. So now you can chain bomb rather than have to wait for the previous bomb to either expire or explode. So that could potentially make bombing units a little bit more viable. We'll still have to see. I am still a little bit unsure of how the bomb damage will compare to other skill kits because it's still not affected by crit damage. Bomb explosion similarly getting another buff. So right now, if you have a bomb on the target, you can explode the bomb immediately with the explosion skill. Now the new buff is going to be an increase in damage depending on how long that bomb was on the target. So if you lay down a bomb on a unit and you explode it instantly, you're now going to do more damage than if the bomb had sat there for a while. So you increase the amount of bomb damage to the target proportion to the amount left. So the more time left on the bomb, the more damage you're going to do. This is another big one. Ignore beneficial effects. I think with the prevalence of Ravens, Dark Cowgirl, Lupinus, all of these units have become very prevalent in the meta because of Endure. Theomars was a banner event early on. Cleaf Endure with his Dark Staff is incredibly hard to manage. And so a lot of people have countered this challenge with ignore beneficial effects. Today, when your unit ignores beneficial effects, it ignores the Endure and can kill past Theo or Cleaf's Endure effect. In the future, ignore beneficial effects will not ignore Endure or Soul Protection. So when a Theo or Cleaf has Endure on, you still need to either strip that Endure or wait for the Endure to expire before you can kill that unit. Soul Protection is the same. Soul Protection, rather than Endure, lets the unit die, but then instantly reses them. So if you kill a unit that ignores, using a unit that ignores beneficial effects that has Soul Protection, they're still going to revive and you have to kill them one more time. So this is definitely going to change the prevalence of ignore beneficial effect units. I think Raven's kit overall is very average, and the main reason people use him is to get past that Endure. So we'll probably see a lot less Ravens across the different servers here. I think we're going to see a lot more strippers. I think provoke is going to be a bigger deal, because you want to provoke the Theo or the Cleaf until their Endure effect wears off, or you want to strip them of that Endure effect completely. So this is going to probably be one of the biggest changes that affects the meta in PvP. Unrevivable, I think this was in how it was intended to do. So this is just a small fix. It's not revive when defeated while having the effect. That's what unrevivable should do. So they're giving that to a new unit, and this is going to hopefully help to counter the Vanessas and the Theos, and we'll get into Fire Mermaid specifically in a little bit. So overall, the global effect changes, I think, are very interesting. I don't know how they will play out. The Endure effect buff is going to be a big one. I hope to see a little bit more bomber units become viable, and this attribute change I think is going to be a big deal, and we'll need to think about attributes a lot more than we have in the past. All right, getting on to units. So Magic Knight is up first. Both the Light and Dark Magic Knight are getting a pretty big buff. So on Light Magic Knight, mana cost and cooldown decreased, number of effects removed increased. So that's a fairly big buff for those that have it. And then they are reworking Dark Magic Knight, it seems. Improvement on pull and area attack, damage increased, rate increased, but they and they also added a removal. Now, this is a very vague description of the adjustment. I also don't have Dark Magic Knight, so I can't pull up her current skills and see what the exact changes are, but it feels like a big rework to Dark Magic Knight. Water Magic Knight. Once again, this description is a little bit vague. Change so that recovery does not stack with multiple attacks. So today, Retrieve Magic, the skill description here, Frozen Body, is wrong. This is applying to Retrieve Magic. So today, Water Magic Knight will recover HP based on the damage dealt for each hit. So this is a multi-hit, right? She could target 8 enemies and you recover HP based on damage dealt of those 8 hits. This makes it sound like that recovery does not happen 8 times. I'm not entirely sure. This could be a nerf to Water Magic Knight, based on how the description is today and what they're saying here. But once again, not very clear. Dark Panda Warrior, change triggered condition for sequential attack. So Dark Panda Warrior has a sequential attack that procs based on a condition. They're changing that trigger, but they don't tell us what that new trigger is going to be. So once again, very vague. Can't glean too much out of this description. Molong going to get continuous recovery from his ultimate, Reckless Assault. Okay, that makes sense. Reckless Assault costs HP to deal damage, and so recuperating a little bit of that with the ultimate makes sense to me. Young Hong and Wo Young, so Light and Dark Sky Dancer. Looks like Young Hong's getting a significant buff. I know a few people on my server have pulled Young Hong and haven't found a good way to build her because her mana cost is so high, and so each hit now has a certain chance to increase the summoner's mana if the target is not a summoner. I feel like this could be a major buff to Young Hong. She is a multi-hitter, and every single hit now has a chance to increase the summoner's mana if she's not targeting a opposing summoner. So if Young Hong is attacking a monster, every hit has a chance to increase the summoner's mana. That seems pretty OP to me. It could make her very viable as a refresher, especially paired up with a Orbia or a Kina, where mana is really your entire utility kit. All right, Fire and Wind Sky Dancers. Mana and cooldown decrease. I think this is very good. A lot of people have Chasun pieces, the Wind Sky Dancer from the event a month ago, but a lot of people aren't using her as a healer. Her kit is very good in terms of her healing capabilities, but her cost is very high. I think it's a 5 mana cost in a 30-second cooldown today. And so a lot of people are choosing to use like a Lulu or a Camilla over Chasun because of the high cost here. So hopefully this gets her down to, I believe, probably a 4 mana cost and maybe 24 second cooldown. Today, let's take a look at what it is. Right now, it's a 5 mana and 30-second cooldown at max skill. And so decreasing the skill's cost is going to potentially make her a lot more viable. So I think that's a good update. The Sliffs, I don't really have too much commentary to provide. I think these are all pretty minor adjustments, and I don't have the light or dark, so I can't speak to that. Wind removing beneficial effects. I think the more beneficial effect removal units out there, the better, because we'll now need to be able to remove beneficial effects to deal with indoors and PvP. So having more units have this ability is good in my opinion, and the water Sliff is just getting a damage increase. Polar Queens. Light Polar Queen. Target skill cooldown increase added, so that's a big buff. And Summoner HP and skill cooldown decrease amount decreased. Summoner HP and skill cooldown decrease amount decreased. Okay, so that's a nerf. So you're going to gain less HP and gain less skill cooldown decrease. But your first skill will increase the enemy's skill cooldown. So not sure how that'll play out. Wind Polar Queen. Mana up effect added. Okay, so that's a small buff. You now gain mana when you use the skill, whether for the summoner or, for the summoner when you use Wind of Changes. So another small buff. Okay, so I think the biggest changes here on this is going to really be the Sky Dancers. I think that might be the most dramatic. The other ones are mostly LD changes, and not a lot of people have those LD units. All right, next page. Jokers. Jokers are the bombers of the group, but only light is getting changes. It feels like a pretty big overhaul here. Remove beneficial effects upon skill hit, so it strips and decreases skill cooldown upon successful removal. So strips and then recovers its own cooldown if it can land the strip. Amputation magic. Remove buff effect, skill acceleration to itself, and skill deceleration to the target. That sounds pretty good. So it removes a buff, it increases its skill cooldown regeneration, and decelerates the enemy's skill cooldown regeneration. So this could be a potentially pretty good unit. It's a LD, so it doesn't apply to a lot of people. Molly, so recovery change based on attack plus max HP. So this is pretty cool. I think it's a Molly buff. It's going to now take into consideration both attack and max HP in the recovery amount. So this is very similar to something like a Wo Young in Summoner's War Arena, where you can have both stats here be stacked, and you can choose to be very tanky or be a little bit of a hybrid and stack some attack as well, and that won't detriment your healing capabilities too much. Water Mermaid. Okay, remove harmful effect if there is no bomb. So that's the new change. Currently today, Energize recovers HP and removes a bomb. So rather than just having a bomb removal skill in this kit, she will now remove harmful effects. So she cleanses if there's no bomb. So that feels like a pretty major buff to Water Mermaid. Okay, I'm very excited about Fire Mermaid here. Number of beneficial effects removed, unrevivable and unrecoverable added, skill cooldown up deleted. So today, Fire Mermaid will increase the enemy's skill cooldown to max, and that's it. In the future, she will remove beneficial effects. She will put on a unrevivable debuff and unrecoverable debuff. So Fire Mermaid now feels like a pretty significant counter to the current meta of running Tions and Vanessas and Dark Mermaids and reviving all the time. Number of beneficial effects removed, unrevivable, and unrecoverable added. So yeah, that you can't heal, you can't revive, and if you land these debuffs and then kill that unit, they're gone from the field for good. So that does feel like a pretty significant buff, and it feels like the Fire Mermaid may be one of the only units in the game right now with this type of kit. So we may start to see a lot more fire mermaids for RTA picks and for arena defense to counter against revive. Okay, Wind Mermaid, shield amount increased. Okay, that's, you know, pretty standard. Hathor, Wind Desert Queen, target skill cooldown increased. So today she will put the enemies to sleep and increase the mana of the summoner, the enemy summoner. So sleep the units, increase mana of the enemy summoner. She will now also increase the enemy unit's skill cooldown. So she'll sleep everybody, increase the cooldown of one unit, and then increase the summoner's mana. Decrease the summoner's mana. So that's potentially a decent buff. I know most people are not running sleep units or Hathor, so this could make her more viable. I'm not entirely sure. Light Desert Queen damage increase. Okay. Beast Monks. I'm personally very excited about the Beast Monk buff, especially the water one. On defend, activation chance and damage is increased. So I don't think I have a screenshot here of the skill, but today Water Beast Monk will protect the summoner, and there is, I think, a 15% chance of activating this thing called Defend. Maybe it's a 50% chance, I'm not sure, but it's a small chance of activating Defend, in which if the summoner has the Defend buff, the Beast Monk will take 50% of the damage and attack the unit that attacked the summoner. So that activation chance has increased, which could make him viable for like an Orbia in PvP. I'm not entirely sure. We're going to have to wait for the actual description of the new skill to be released and look at the multipliers. But overall, Beast Monk buffs seem to be interesting. Water Archangel is getting a buff on 2 skills. So S2 is going to get defense increased, and S3 is going to get harmful effects removed. So S3 is now going to strip. Right now, S2 heals, and right now, S3 also really just heals. So S3 now will not only heal, AoE heal based on defense, but will also cleanse. So kind of like a Nat 5 Lulu, essentially. That's very cool. Okay. Fire Pioneer, Chiwu, sleeve attack. So target skill cooldown up added. So the target unit's cooldown will increase and change from removal after damage to damage after removal. Okay, so that's a buff. That's definitely a buff. So today what Chiwu will do is he will first do damage to the units, and then he will strip buffs. Now he will strip first and then do damage. So for example, if you have a shield on, if you have crit res up, if you have a defense buff up, today Chiwu is going to do damage first and then strip those buffs. In the future, Chiwu is going to strip the defense buff first, for example, and then do damage. So that does feel like a buff in terms of the sequencing of what happens. And he is also going to increase the enemy unit's skill cooldown. So that feels like a pretty big buff to Chiwu. Okay. Water Monkey King, clone attack. The last hit removes without condition, applies invincibility upon successful removal. Okay. So today he will attack 4 times and removes beneficial effects per hit that critically hits. So 4 times attacks, if those attacks critically hit, has a chance to remove beneficial effects. The last 2 hits removes 2 beneficial effects if it critically hits. So both of the strips are based on a condition. It looks like in the future, the first 3 hits will still have this condition of critting, but the last hit will not have a crit condition. So the last hit will strip regardless of if you crit or not. And then they're adding the invincibility, which makes him a little bit more like the Summoner Wars Arena version. He on the 4th hit, he applies invincibility to himself if he can strip a debuff. So that's pretty cool. Pirate Captains. So we have Galleon here, time to loot, mana cost and cooldown decrease, damage removed, decreases nearby ally skill cooldown. Okay, that seems like a pretty significant buff. I think he hasn't really been widely used. He was free. His pieces were free to buy in the arena shop. So if you had been purchasing those pieces every week, maybe this is good news to you. Wind Pirate Captain, target skill cooldown up, chance increase based on the level. Okay, so this is just a slight adjustment to the current skill. All right, this is the last page, I believe, of the monster changes. Ifrits, so Veramos, recovery amount increased. Okay, must be nice to have them. Valkyries, Dark Valkyrie, immunity duration equals to drain. I'm not entirely sure what that means. I don't have Dark Valkyrie. I've never encountered Dark Valkyrie, so this could be a buff. Not entirely sure. Okay, Katarina, Wind Valkyrie, increased damage without invincibility. This is going to be nice. So Katarina has a skill today where if she has invincibility, the attack will ignore defense. In the future, there's going to be an increased damage without the condition of having invincibility. So this description is a little bit vague. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to play out, if it's still ignore defense or if it's just increased damage, if there's another layer of ignore defense if it has invincibility, or what this exactly entails, but this could be interesting. All the fire water jack-o'-lanterns are getting a slight buff, so existing kit with a little bit of a buff, nothing too crazy there. Same thing with all of these units that are getting damage increase. So a couple of your Ravens, your Chimera, Wind Occult Girl, and Water Undine are getting damage increases. Theomars, okay, activation condition changed from below certain HP percent to lethal damage. So this is the big change, but I think this is how Endure was intended to work from the get. So today, Theomars will put on Endure if it falls below a percentage of HP. In the future, Theomars will activate his Endure when he receives a hit that should have killed him. So that's what lethal damage means. So it's a slight adjustment to how Endure works. I think that is really how Endure is supposed to work, so it makes sense that they're fixing this. I'm not sure exactly how this is going to impact the gameplay. It could make the Endure a little bit stronger because it doesn't activate too early and then expire and then go on cooldown. It activates at the moment of lethal damage, and so you're popping it at the right time to increase survivability. Because today you can pop Theomars Endure when he's at like 20% health. You can wait it out and then come back and kill him. In the future, unless you were already soon to kill him, he won't pop his Endure. So it might be a big change, might not be. Light Cowgirl, number of removal increased, so number of beneficial effects removed increased, and unrecoverable added. So that's pretty cool. I wish I had her. That seems like a pretty impressive kit. She will strip and also add heal block. And then increasing or decreasing the chance on Chaser. I don't know what the skill does. I don't know if the skill is going up or down on chance. So once again, come to us being very vague on what they're doing with this unit. Water Fairy, increased recovery. Okay. Water Mummy, changed so that it activates at a certain chance upon removing the cool time. Not really sure what that means. I don't see people change so that it activates at a certain chance. Yeah, I don't know what that means. Very vague, kind of obscure units. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see for the actual release on what Water Mummy does. All right, let's talk to Summoners. The Summoners are probably the biggest change that people are talking about because it impacts gameplay probably the most, and strategy, and then your team compositions. So it has cascading effects that really can impact the game overall. I won't go into details on each of these, so you can read through them, but I think what people are taking away from this is Kina is getting a buff, Cleaf is getting a nerf, especially on Dark Cleaf, and then Orbia is also, I think, getting a nerf. So Kina is getting reworked a little bit. So the one that a lot of people are focused on is the Dark Kina is now only going to revive 2 monsters rather than 3. That's a big change. Wind is going to remove not just 1 beneficial effect but 2, so that's a big buff. And then everything else is essentially a significant buff to Kina and how she works. On Cleaf, which is probably the hottest topic with this patch, is the Dark Cleaf is essentially able to have infinite endure today. So between the passive and the skill on the Dark Cleaf's blunt weapon, Cleaf can keep up endure with maybe 1 second of downtime in between endure pops. So that endure duration from the dark weapon is now going to decrease, and endure effect is changing to crit res down. So these aren't necessarily completely going to shatter Dark Cleaf, but it is probably taking away the primary reason people play Dark Cleaf so predominantly. So this is going to be very interesting. Now, is this actually a nerf? In my opinion, no, it's not, because Endure got such a massive buff that ignore beneficial effects no longer applies to Endure, that once both of those changes happen at the same time, I really don't think this is a buff to Cleaf. And then on Orbia, she's getting some damage increase, which I guess is nice, but nothing significant. And then they're nerfing probably the biggest PvP proponent for playing Orbia, which is her ability to apply heal block with her Dark Staff. And they are now reducing that heal block duration. Hopefully it's not by too much. Orbia is the hardest summoner objectively to play in PvP, and her Dark Staff applying unrecoverable is the only defining characteristic of why Orbia could be viable in PvP, and they are going to nerf that. So overall, I think Orbia is getting a nerf. I would trade this unrecoverable duration for damage any day. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the patch notes. Lot of things coming. Very excited to see that Com2uS is doing probably smaller incremental changes rather than significant changes rapidly, because people are still figuring out the game. They're investing resources, and you don't want to completely shift the investment that people have made from something that was viable to completely unviable. So overall, I think this was a decent first patch for North America. I'm excited to see some of the units hopefully become a little bit more viable, such as bombers, such as the fire mermaid to counter revivers. And I'm very excited to see what the new world of PvP looks like without ignore beneficial effects impacting Endure, and Cleaf getting the Dark Staff nerf. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the servers.